Probably good to start now.
Got it. Thanks. All righty. Well, here we go. Okay, starting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, never mind. Hold up. Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar launch for NCAI's Food Sovereignty and Food Production Resource Directory. My name is Sadie Redigol. I'm an enrolled member of the Otay Missouri Tribe of Indians, and I'll be today's moderator. Just to start us off before we get into our welcoming, I wanted to provide a small housekeeping note. So today, because we have a stacked agenda with a couple of presenters, we are asking for all attendees to utilize the chat box function. If your question is for a specific panelist, please identify that person in your question. If it's for all, just say all. And lastly, if we don't get to your question today, please feel free to email NCI staff at foodsovereignty@ncai.org. And with that, I'll pass it on over to Ian Record. Ian, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Sadie. On behalf of the National Congress of American Indians, I wanted to invite our partners and attendees to today's webinar. Very excited to launch this new resource directory, which has been a labor of love for the Tribal Governance and Special Projects Department here at NCAI, and specifically the Tribal Food Sovereignty Advancement Initiative. I first wanted to acknowledge the extraordinary work and attention to detail of Sadie Red Eagle, Ashley Hamilton, Marlene Wakefield, and several other NCI staff who've been working on this thing tirelessly over the last 18 months, engaging with our many partners in this space to get a handle on what kind of information do they want to make sure is contained within this directory, not just what types of programs, but what kind of information is most relevant about those programs to tribal nations, Native organizations, and individual Native food producers. And so I know Sadie's going to share a lot more about the directory here over the course of the webinar, but I just wanted to acknowledge their hard work and also acknowledge the engagement with our partners. Our partners have been invaluable in guiding us on this. We are by no means the resident experts in this space, and we rely on our partners like Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative, Intertribal Agriculture Council, First Nations Development Institute, and many other partners to make sure that we're meeting the need and we're framing the resources that we produce and share out with Indian country in accessible and meaningful ways. And so with that, I just wanted to take a minute and briefly preview for you some of the other things that we've done under the Tribal Food Sovereignty Advancement Initiative and other things that we will be doing and things that we will be sharing. Just this past year, we held a series of 4 policy symposiums that looked at the nexus between food sovereignty and critical policy areas ranging from agriculture to land to water and then to climate action. And those 4 symposiums are informing a comprehensive policy brief that we'll be releasing in the next few months. And then also it informed the development and release of the Farm Bill policy brief that was released by NCAI and its partners last month, right before the holidays. And so over the course of the webinar, we will be sharing links to those resources with you, as well as to the case studies. We are close to completing a set of 5 case studies that document leading tribal approaches to food sovereignty, food security, and food production. And this really looks at what are tribal governments doing at a governance level, at a sort of a foundational governance level, to take ownership in their food systems again, and develop sustainable approaches that will last well into the future. And you see here on the slide the first case study that we released on the Yurok tribe. Next week, on January 21st, we'll be holding a webinar to release the second of the 5 case studies, and that one will be on the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin. And then following that, we'll be releasing case studies and holding webinars featuring the 3 other tribes, and those are the Osage Nation, the San Carlos Apache tribe, and the Blackfeet Nation in Montana. The last thing I would mention is that over the course of about the next year, we're going to be working with our partners to develop an online resource center that provides a hub where tribal leaders and tribal practitioners, tribal food producers can go and see in real time what different tribes are doing in this space. Again, really focused on what tribal governments are doing. And so one of the things it will track and showcase are news coverage, news stories about what different tribes are doing in this area, how they're doing things like leveraging CARES Act funding, for example, to build food system infrastructure in their communities. And so stay tuned for more information on that. We'll be eagerly engaging stakeholders from across Indian country on these resources that we have under development. Really excited for the work. And again, wanted to thank our partners for their invaluable input and feedback on these resources at their various stages of development. So with that, Sadie, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you, Ian. So next slide. Thank you. So as he mentioned, this resource directory is an outgrowth of our initiative. We developed this resource to provide a comprehensive collation of relevant funding and other resources for support. We wanted to ensure tribal producers were prioritized in the making of this directory. And one way we did that was through our TA provider section, with highlighting 4 Indian country specific TA providers that we'll hear from in a bit. And lastly, we wanted to ensure that it was usable. This resource directory is over 90 pages, so we knew we needed a categorization tool that would allow for users to easily identify resources that were by topic and to narrow their searches for the type of support they were looking for. And so now I'll talk a little bit about the categorization. Next slide. So we decided to do a 5-part section categorization, the first being the federal grant and loan resources. This section has 4 subsections, one being funding resources that are available to individuals and tribal nations and organizations. The second being funding for tribal nations and organizations specifically. Third being the tribal nations with partners. And so in this section, partners are identified as higher ed institutions and states or regional organizations. And our 4th subsection in this category is loan programs. And in those sections, we identify who is eligible for what program at the federal level. And so this entire section alone has 82 program entries with funding from USDA, BIA, and other federal agencies. Our second section is the foundational and other organization funding resources. This section is categorized by tribal-specific grants at the beginning and other sources of funding mentioned thereafter. We wanted to ensure that these funding resources had a history of funding tribal organizations specifically, and so we have 20 entries in this section. Our 3rd and 4th sections highlight federal and non-federal technical assistance programs available for tribal producers, with 17 federal programs and 8 non-federal programs highlighted in this section. Lastly, we have an other resources section, which highlights publications, webinars, and other documents from federal and non-federal partners alike. So in total, we have 127 program entries and 37 other resources highlighted throughout the directory, with a grand total of 164 resources highlighted throughout the document. And now I will transition to reviewing a program entry sample. And so here we have the Farmers Market Promotion Program. We incorporated the basic information for grant programs such as the application window, the funding frequency, total program funding, award range, a website, and a listserv. We decided to incorporate these other entry fields that would be unique for our directory. The first being the funding priority criteria. This entry field lets users know of any special considerations and priority funding needed to apply for this program. So an example of this would be tribal nations from X region are allowed to apply for this program. The next is the match requirement. This entry field informs users of any matching funds that are required through the program and if it is an in-kind or cash contributions. We decided to add this from feedback that we received from our reviewers last summer. Next is our indirect cost rate cap. This entry field informs users of indirect cost rates for grant funding resources, specifically looking at federal grants. Next is the application requirements. This entry field informs users of what documentation and other forms will be needed from the applicant. An example of this is this program is asking for a 12-page project narrative. And so we wanted to ensure that tribal producers and tribes knew exactly what they were getting in for with this specific program. The next is the example grantee. This entry field talks about tribal specific examples and where necessary is their funding amount and a small project summary. So as you can see in this example highlighted here with the White Mountain Apache. And lastly, our program contact and notes. These entry fields try to provide a direct email and contact person for each program that we've mentioned throughout the directory, and special notes with additional program information such as fact sheets, grant funding portfolios, and things of that nature. So with that, that wraps up my review. And so now we will transitioning to our panelist discussion. And I want to thank today's panelists for joining us today. And I'll first pass on over to Janie Hipp to start us off. So Janie, please take it away.
So Sadie, thank you so much. And thanks everybody else who's on the panel. And thanks NCAI for the hard work that I know went into putting all of this together. I'm going to keep my remarks very short today. I want to start it off by just saying, I've worked in this area for 37 years and I've never had enough resource directories. And so I just wanted to say that out loud and get it out there as soon as possible. If you have ever been in my office, you'll know that I have multiple resource directories in my bookshelves. And now they're online. But I will tell you, if you're a tribal government, if you're a native producer, if you have a food business, your lifeblood is information and resource directories, because the whole agriculture area is so broad and so vast that we need as many we need as many breadcrumb resources as we can possibly find. And so I just want to thank everyone involved in this who had a hand in reviewing it or pulling it together. It is a heavy lift, but it is so worth it. So having said that, I will tell you also that I wanted to share with you, the Native American Agriculture Fund has only been stood up really since we started in late 2018, and we really got a wind under us in 2019. We've already done 28 million in 3 different requests for applications to fund activities and work where you are. We have over 200 grantees that work with us right now, and that's all happened in a very short period of time. We haven't even begun to put on our own website additional resources, and I can tell you that I pledge to work with all of our other partners here to make sure that we provide as much information about the grantees, the work that we know of that can continue to contribute and grow these resource directories and resource guides, because it's so critical that we all talk to each other and that we all see what's going on and see if there are lessons learned that can help us. And particularly, looking out for any loan or grant opportunities, or specifically federal programs or other foundation programs that can help us all be in a place of success. So look for that to come. We also released in late fall a vision document that specifically talks about infrastructure needs for agriculture in Indian country. We're just getting started, but we go away in 2038. So I could tell you straight up, being as much of a resource directory advocate as I am, we're always at NAF going to be leaning into this and working with subject matter experts and other folks who are involved in the organizations that you'll hear from in just a minute. But I will tell you that as a producer, it's so important to know where loan capital is. Access to capital and issues related to that led to the Keep Siegel case that led to the creation of the Native American Ag Fund. And so we are always, every day, very focused on access to capital. But I'll also share that the initial funds that led to the creation of this resource directory actually came out of the fast track funds that came from the Keep Siegel settlement itself. So I just think we have so much in common in this space, and we have so many positive things that are going to come by just continuing to lift up resources and wrap around technical support to ag and food in Indian country. I'm excited about where this is going to go. And I'm just going to leave it at that, Sadie, and wait to hear from some amazing other panelists.
Thank you, Janie, and thanks for those remarks. Now I will pass it on over to Linda from USDA Office of Tribal Relations. Linda, please take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for having us here today. We appreciate this invitation. And I'm really excited about this new resource guide on two of my favorite topics, food sovereignty and food production, of many topics, I might add, but definitely a favorite. I've been at USDA for almost 30 years in June, which is a long time. And I have to say that in that time, even today, I still learn about new programs and resources that we have available through USDA. So having these resource guides, I can't underscore what Janie said enough, is just a great way to kind of help empower, whether it's a tribal government, tribal organization, or an individual farmer and producer, to find out what's available that fits in and connects to help support what their individual goals and objectives are. So thanks for all the hard work. I know this is a lot to put this together. I'm going to talk a little bit about USDA. Our vision is to provide economic opportunity through innovation and to help America thrive, to promote agricultural production that better nourishes Americans while also helping feed others throughout the world, and to preserve our nation's natural resources through conservation, restored forests, improved watersheds, and healthy private working lands. The Office of Tribal Relations supports and fosters USDA's environment that encourages meaningful tribal consultation, collaboration, and coordination. And it ensures access to the various programs and services that we offer, and enhances the relationship between USDA agency, tribes, tribal organization, and American Indian and Alaska Native citizens. Our role is an intergovernmental capacity, and we're focused on upholding our trust responsibilities and ensuring that individuals have full access to the portfolio of USDA programs and services. While there are many laws and authorities to complete the work at USDA, the Farm Bill is the largest. With the passage of the Agricultural Improvement Act of 2018, this is a 867 program that has 12 different separate titles. And while many of the programs and services offered in the Farm Bill are available, in addition to that, there were 63 tribal-specific provisions. This is historic, and I know many of you that are on this panel worked really hard on that. In addition to that, there's two self-governance provisions that are included in the Farm Bill, one with the Food Distribution Program on Indian reservations, and then the other with the Forest Service. So we've been working to try to help coordinate that within our office. We really do appreciate the work that so many organizations such as NCAI and all the esteemed members on this panel do every day to collaborate and coordinate through so many ways and actions. This resource guide is just one more important way to try to help ensure that the access to programs and services are available, and to help coordinate and ensure that tribes, tribal citizens, tribal organizations all can maximize the benefits of programs that are available to them. It's also really useful to us because as we focus on USDA programs and services, we're not always aware of all the other agencies that offer similar things. And one of the things that I've always noticed in federal programs is there's different places or intersections that kind of come in that have different programs and services based on something, whether it's the production of food or what other issues there are out there. So being able to try to navigate that, maximize what fits into what your individual needs are is so critical. So I just want to thank NCAI for all their work and effort on that. I would also like to leave you with this, that I'm really honored and privileged to work in the Office of Tribal Relations with such a dedicated team of people that are really committed to the work that we do every day. And I want to invite you to feel free to reach out to us anytime. I will put something in the comments with our email address and phone number, and invite you to reach out to us sometime. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, for joining us today. And now we'll be transitioning to our panelist discussion, starting with Zach Ducheneaux from Intertribal Ag. So Zach, please take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks to the folks at NCAI for putting together this valuable resource, and also for including us as the TA providers that sort of have the job as interpreters in Indian country for those of us that are serving our communities, helping them understand oftentimes what comes across as pretty jargony program and service guidelines. We were approached by NCAI very early on in the process of building this resource directory, and we offered some input that's been valuable to us as we go about performing technical assistance duties across Indian country, and really try to bring an example. When you talk about a resource, bring an example of that resource. And we're just absolutely tickled to death to see that NCAI has done that in this resource directory, because when you're out on the prairie in the middle of the Oglala Sioux Reservation, trying to see a way that this can benefit, that a program or service that you're reading about can benefit your community and your own little microeconomy that is your operation, without knowing what someone else has done in that space, it's really challenging to be able to envision yourself participating. And the fact that they have tagged the technical assistance providers right there in the margin that have the expertise to be able to help you in that is really going to be helpful. I think it's important to understand that this is a living document. And one of the things that they shared with us very early on was that this will continue to be updated and edited as changes are made to the programs. And as technical assistance providers, it's important for us to understand that we're not only sharing how the rubber meets the road in these programs, but we have a duty to share the connections we make as we figure out these programs. So when we have a conversation about getting into a farm service agency loan, we bring our connections that we've made as we navigate that program to that conversation on behalf of our producers, and also provide the feedback as to when things work, when things don't work, so that we can improve these programs as we move into future farm bill discussions, future policy discussions, maybe for future personnel discussions out there in our reservation communities. It's as important to those that are charged with administering the programs in the federal government to help them understand what works and what doesn't work. And then our role as technical assistance providers, we can come in and help guide further policy development. One of the things that we've got, a decided advantage is we've got a network of technical assistance providers all across the country. And by virtue of that agreement that we have with the Office of Tribal Relations to provide those technical assistance services, we put together a success story document where we illustrate once per quarter from each of the regions a story of success in providing technical assistance to the USDA. And that's a document that we would be glad to share with anybody on the call. So it helps almost give life to the resource director that we have in front of us. And we're currently searching for a technical assistance provider in the Eastern region and here in the Great Plains region. So if any of you know of folks that want to become part of a team to help serve as these translators, please get in touch with us. In addition to that technical assistance program, we also offer a suite of services that are really aimed at a broader effort in bringing our natural resources to bear for the benefit of our Indian communities. We've got a regenerative agriculture initiative that we're currently in the process of trying to get out into the communities. We just rolled that out last spring when COVID kind of hit, and the in-person communication that's really needed to improve the delivery of these services was starting to realize our first challenges. And we've also got our American Indian Foods Program funded through the USDA, through the Foreign Ag Service, where we will take reservation producers overseas and help them develop an export market for their product. And we just recently, through a partnership with the Native American Ag Fund, have stood up a formal initiative to advocate and try to improve federal policy. Our eyes are expressly on the next version of the Farm Bill. However, that doesn't mean that we will not continue to partner with NCAI as we look to all of the legislative initiatives that are moving through the halls of Congress and the regulatory processes for rulemaking and consultation as well. So with that, look forward to helping develop this further in the future, providing input and serving the rest of Indian country with what we hope will resonate with you as quality technical assistance, and look forward to hearing from our partners on the call.
All right, thank you, Zach. And thanks for the kudos. So now I will pass it on over to Erin Parker, the Director of Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative. Erin, please take it away.
Thank you, Sadie, and thanks to Zach and to Janie and to Linda for starting us off here. I would definitely echo everything that Janie and Zach had to say about the importance of resource guides and how wonderful it is to have all of these programs outlined in one place, not only from USDA and the vast portfolio of opportunities that Linda talked about, but also bringing in other programs like BIA programs and the programs of all of us as technical assistance partners, the offerings from the Native American Agriculture Fund, from the Indian Land Tenure Foundation, from First Nations Development Institute, Intertribal Agriculture Council, and here at IFAI, in addition to a wealth of other funders. It's really representative to me of how much cooperation and coordination it really takes to make food systems change happen. This is a really holistic look at resources. It's more than I think any one government agency or partner could have accomplished, and I just really applaud USDA. I really applaud NCAI for working with USDA, for working with NAF, and with all of us as technical assistance partners to make this happen. NCAI did a fantastic job putting this together, and this resource guide is absolutely something that we're going to be using at IFAI to help the tribal governments, leaders, policymakers, and food systems change makers across Indian country that we work with daily to help them find the resources that they need to continue their work all in one easy to find place. You can just easily drop that link to someone and help them find what they need to find. It's a really, really great resource. And I'm delighted that IFAI is included as a technical assistance partner in this space. For us at IFAI, the technical assistance that we offer is a little bit different than the technical assistance that Zach was just talking about. We're a translator too, but we do some translation into tribal governance, and that's the perspective that we bring to our work and the technical assistance that we offer. So as you're looking through NCAI's fantastic resource guide here, you can see us listed as a TA provider for opportunities that are really adjacent to tribal governance led initiatives. So things like the 638 self-determination opportunities that Linda mentioned at USDA for FDIPR and also for forestry, also for the alternative funding arrangements for the Natural Resources Conservation Service at USDA, which we've been kind of calling 638 Light. It's not exactly the same, but it does have some opportunities to promote tribal sovereignty in the space of federal government programs. So we are here to be a technical assistance partner on that kind of work and offer our legal research and policy analysis skills to help tribal leaders, tribal attorneys, and tribal policymakers walk through that uniquely complicated space of doing food systems work at the center of tribal law and policy, federal law and policy, and agricultural and food law and policy, all that complicated stuff right in the middle. That's we're designed at IFAI to help folks walk through that. And this resource guide is really going to help us do that, as we're able to immediately point to the resources, whether it's grants or loan funds that people can use to scale up businesses, to start food sovereignty initiatives. And I'm also really excited about the case studies that Ian mentioned, because one of the things that we do frequently as we're working with tribal leaders on tribal food policy at FAI is point to some of the good work that's going on around Indian country in this space, to point to those things that are already happening, the changes that are already happening, where tribal governments are using their inherent tribal sovereignty to regulate for the health, safety, and welfare of their people and their lands and their natural resources, and put that tribal sovereignty and food sovereignty. And that's really what we're designed to do every day at IFAI, and just an example of how we can be a practical resource for you in this space of technical assistance from a governance perspective. That 638 opportunity that Linda mentioned, that I just mentioned again for FDIPR, actually opened today. So I'm really excited to be on a webinar with all of you today where I can share that the applications are finally open for 638 for FDIPR. That announcement came through this morning on the Federal Register, and our team has an infographic out today that walks through that process. I'm going to drop it in the chat after I finish speaking. We're also going to do a webinar next week to walk through not only the application process, but also some strategic planning things and some things from a tribal government perspective that you might want to think about as you're applying for those opportunities, whether that's an overlap with food safety regulations, whether it's an overlap with protecting your traditional foods or anything like that. We're going to cover quite a bit of ground in that webinar next week, and that'll be Thursday at 1 p.m. Central. And I would imagine that we will probably be linking back to NCAI's resource guide in that webinar as well, because it takes more than one opportunity or one program or one piece of policy to do food systems work. We all know, everybody on the panel knows how broad food systems work is and how many different policies it takes to really make food systems work happen. So I'm thrilled to be included here as a TA partner. Thanks again to NCAI for including us as a partner, and also for including us on this webinar. Please reach out to us and our team anytime. We are happy to help at IFAI, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the rest of the panelists. So back to you, Sadie.
All right, thank you, Erin. We're excited to hear about your webinar next week. Now we'll be turning it on over to Ade and Richard from the First Nations Development Institute to provide a little bit of their TA work. So Ade, please take it away.
Thank you, Sadie, and I just echo everyone's comments. We're so honored to be part of the resource directory and to be able to work on the document long ago. So it seems like such a long time ago. And I just want to echo what Zach said, that this is a resource document, and anybody who works in the food space probably knows how fluid this space is, that people and players and funders and programs and policies change so often that the resource directory can also act as a snapshot of what was happening in 2019, 2020, and 2021. But at the same time, those tribes or tribal nonprofits or producers really should see this as guideposts, because things are changing so rapidly in the space that we work in. And Erin just gave a good example of how things can change quickly or maybe not so quickly around the FDIPR program and the application opening. I work for First Nations Development Institute. I'm Coach Tien Kiowa. I work for First Nations Development Institute. I run the Native Agriculture and Food Systems program. And Richard will also be on the call, and he'll give more details about some of the more specific programming. But in general, First Nations has been around for 41 years. We've been funding in the food space since the early 80s. We started the Native Agriculture and Food Systems program in 2007 because we noticed that a lot of the grant requests coming into First Nations around economic development were specifically around food, land, and water issues. And so the initiative was meant to dedicate specific program dollars to support tribal governments, tribal nonprofits in rural reservation areas to access funding. And really our sweet spot is we're a granting intermediary. That means we work with larger foundations to fund Indigenous projects on the ground. And our model is that we are like the starting point, right? We are the smaller grants, and we hope to help the projects grow so that they can get and attract larger funders. And so we have over 370 different projects we've supported. We've given out around $9 million. And we are listed in the resource directory, but also I invite you to go to firstnations.org to look at specific opportunities because they change annually. And we currently have one open for the Gather grant that closes today. I should note that, we've been in this space so long. I echo what Janie said. It may seem like a lot of money, millions of dollars, but really we're looking at hundreds of years of inadequate supports for Indigenous food sovereignty models. And so millions of dollars does not cut it. And no matter how we slice the pie, like it's really a small amount. So there's always room for additional funders, always room for additional advocates to increase financial supports to food projects in Indian country. And before I turn it to Richard, my last comment will be, we discussed the word technical assistance quite often when we were creating this, working with NCAI when we were creating this resource directory, because we should note that USDA does have formal agreements with different organizations, depending on the program, that act as formal technical assistance providers. Sometimes those technical assistance providers are not in Indian country, even though they want to increase tribal projects. So it's always good to ask USDA representatives who the formalized technical assistance providers are, but also that as practitioners of food sovereignty, whether you're a producer or a government, we should always be advocating for some of those USDA technical assistance dollars to flow to Indian country. That says a lot about what USDA values and how valuable the Indigenous perspective are to some of these programs. Like our USDA representative said, there's so many programs. So it's always important to talk to those program managers and to get the details about who the technical, how they provide those technical assistance resources and dollars to Indian country. So I will pass it to Richard, who can talk more specifically about some of our larger programs that are directly funded with USDA.
Sikuli, everyone. My name is Richard Elm-Hill. I'm a program officer here at First Nations. I'm also a member of the Oneida Nation in Wisconsin. One of the programs I wanted to highlight is our Native Farm to School initiative, which I think that the resource guide is going to support these groups tremendously as they look at models to explore together, and also look to increase their funding. Like they said, a lot of the folks we fund are starting out or just getting their foot into the door. Others have been in there for quite some time, and just being able to share that knowledge back and forth and hand them something that they're able to just see the breadth of the work that's happening in Indian country. And I also wanted to share that, I also think that this resource goes beyond just our professionals. It really can reach the students to give them an idea of what projects exist in their local or regional communities. And I think that kind of paves the way as well as to getting them involved in those projects and supporting partnerships that happen there. So I'm really excited about this guide. I will definitely be using it as we provide TA for the Native Farm to School, as well as other programs we have here at First Nations. Thanks.
Thank you, Richard and Ade. Thanks for joining today and to providing your perspectives on the directory. And now we will transition to Chris Stainbrook, the president of the Indian Land Tenured Foundation. So Chris, please take it away.
Hihane Washpe, welcome. I second everything that's been said about the resource directory, although one thing that has not been said, and I want to make sure it's clear, is that for years, Indian Land Tenure Foundation has called upon Intertribal Ag Council staff throughout the country to help us with various projects when we couldn't figure it out. I felt terribly guilty about that for a long time, and now I'll just point to the resource directory when we call them. So thank you to NCAI for relieving all of my guilt. The other thing I should tell you is that the foundation works as a community foundation, and over the years we've been able to put about $55 million into Indian country, working on specific Indian land projects as well as broader projects with the federal government on policy related to Indian land, particularly trust land. So we had gotten to a point where our network was largely the federally recognized tribal extension program agents on 33 of the reservations. And we ended up setting up a fund that manages dollars coming into the FERTEP programs, but dollars that can be used flexibly. So they receive some amount of support from the federal government. And then as they go through the year, and especially a year like this, where all the conditions change on the reservation, they get pulled into different areas of activities, and we provide some of the support for their changes on that. The other thing, and I would go back to the earlier comments, is this is a guide that really needs to be kept alive. It needs to be changed on a regular basis and kept up to date, because even in my last 3 days on the phone with people in DC, we're seeing substantial changes in some of the program areas. In fact, one of the program areas that we've been closely involved with has been the highly fractionated Indian land loan program. And the foundation received a $10 million allocation of those loan funds. We have 7 million still uncommitted, and we anticipated having another 10 million available going forward. And the staff has been telling us that it will not be in the next farm bill and will not get an allocation. Those are some of the changes that happen on a regular basis, and I think NCAI is to be commended to keep this resource directory alive. We have several other, and you can go to the next slide if you want. We have several other resources that I would like to make you aware of. National Indian Carbon Coalition is working on carbon projects with tribes, and now we've expanded that to be available to individual farmers and ranchers, and we're building a methodology for combining those projects. This is a project that is a partnership between Indian Land Tenure Foundation and Intertribal Ag Council. The Indian Land Capital Company, which runs the highly fractionated Indian land program for us, is a wholly owned subsidiary of ILTF, and makes loans to tribes for land purchases as well as land development on a full faith and credit basis. And today, I think we have out about $22 million in loans out of the capital company. At least 3/4 of those, if not more, have been for agricultural lands, various tribes buying farms and ranches as they come available. And then a project that we started 4 years ago was a piece to look at what are we losing through the allotments and the alienated properties on reservations to the Indian economy from the agricultural sector. And so we've been working with some folks at Colorado State University, and we will release the Native Indian Land Information System, which is the GIS system, and provides information on ag lands on all of the reservations regarding productivity. And then one last piece, and this is one that has become exceptionally important the last 9 months, and that's a program that we write for. We do wills for Indian farmers and ranchers so that their land can remain intact and remain productive as they pass it on to the next generation. Because of the shutdowns on many of the reservations, we've had to accelerate a piece called Will in a Box, which essentially helps Indian people with trust resources to create their own will and then have it reviewed by an attorney. And it helps move that process along. And we will continue to keep it out there. It does need an attorney's review at the end, but we're getting requests daily for will writing services, and this is one way that we're trying to move that along quickly. These are just some resources that could be added to this particular resource. We were told at one point about 10 years ago that food production and land weren't connected, which kind of, I think it drove us a little bit to look more and more at the food production and how that food production can help the tribes as well as individuals expand their land holdings. And the more they expand their land holdings, the more they increase sovereignty of the reservations. And that's what we are engaged in. Again, thank you to NCAI for relieving all of my guilt. And I know Zach tried to make the Olalla reservation sound like it was out in the middle of nowhere. But let me assure you, it's a beautiful place to be. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chris. And now I'll pass it on over to Ian Record to get us started for the questions.
Yeah, thank you to all of our panelists. I really appreciate, again, the support and the contributions you made to this resource directory. And everyone's right, this is a living document, and it's one thing to say that, it's another thing to figure out how do you actually ensure that it is a living document. And I think we're going to ensure that it lives and grows with the needs of Indian country and also the available sources of support, both financial and otherwise, and how fluid that environment is and is likely to remain. So a couple ways we're going to do it. We're going to be always, continuing to engage our partners, both federal and non-federal, to see if there are new sources of financials and other types of support for tribal nations, organizations, and individual producers that can and should be added to the directory. And then also on a monthly basis, we're going to be tracking any new RFAs, RFPs, grant announcements, those kinds of things, and making sure that that information is updated in each existing entry in the resource directory. And so that'll be the work of Sadie and Ashley and team to, systematically review the directory every month and figure out which entries are due for an update, and do that and reload it to the website. I did also want to mention something that I put in the chat a bit ago, and will again. I mentioned earlier that next week we will be launching our second food sovereignty case study in the Oneida Nation. And I just put in there the registration link to the webinar, which will be held this time next week, next Thursday from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be having 3 representatives from the Oneida Nation coming and sharing more about their approach. The case study gives you the basics about what they're doing, how they're doing it, and why they're doing it. But we wanted to give them an opportunity to provide much more detail. With that, I wanted to open it up for our participants, our attendees, to ask questions in the chat. And I'm going to kick us off by asking a question that, of all the panelists to chime in if they wish, that some of you referenced. And one of the things we heard in putting this resource directory together is just the monumental challenge that both tribes and individual producers face in trying to cobble together the various funding pools that they need to make farm and other types of food production enterprises get off the ground, and how they can grow them over time, how they can sustain them. And I wonder if you guys could speak a little bit more to the nature of the challenge, how difficult that is for so many across Indian country, and how important it is to have all of these different sources in one place at your fingertips, including sources, honestly, that many out in Indian country don't even know exist, and are now going to be much more likely to apply for these different things. And if nothing else, it will show the federal government the incredible need there is out there across Indian country. So I'll just open it up to the floor panelists to see who wants to chime in. I imagine Zach and Janie in particular have thoughts to share on this topic.
Sure, I'll go ahead and start. Thanks, Ian. As we try to bring these programs and services and opportunities to Indian country, to the farmers, ranchers, producers, tribal organizations, tribal farms and ranches, we really like, as I mentioned before, we see ourselves as translators, and we want to stay engaged in that process. And one of the challenges that we find is that we'll get started in a technical assistance relationship with an entity, and sometimes that entity, whether it's that farmer, rancher, producer, feels like, well, the technical assistance part's done, we'll go over to the Farm Service Agency now. But it's important to maintain that connection as a TA provider with your constituents so that you can guide them all the way through the process, because oftentimes after that initial conversation, the wheels come off it. And sometimes we find out 6 months later, well, how'd that go? We figured it all went well, and come to find out that it didn't go so well. And what that does is it lets us as a TA provider share that experience with someone else and share with them, here is right where the weak point is in this handoff. So if we've got to make sure we stay engaged, because programs change, personnel change, and the better we can be at speaking with one voice as a TA provider and with a producer or a small business, the better we're going to be able to help them navigate that. And it's critical that we stay connected and try to maintain that conversation so that when we do get down the road to, maybe the producer has a bad year and they need to do some loan servicing. Well, if we've done our job as a TA provider and stayed connected with that producer we're up to date on everything. We've got the financial statements ready to go. We're ready to go in there and provide that extra level of assistance. So, you know, I think I speak for all of the TA providers as well. We network amongst each other frequently, and we share those type of stories so that the folks over at ILTF that are providing the resources there can benefit from our experience, and we don't have to have that experience brand new every time we step into that. Same with the day. We're on, seems like 3 or 4 panels a week these days a day. And of course, Janie and the crew at NAF and Aaron over at IFAI, we try to share all of our stories amongst each other. So we're providing a more robust technical assistance experience for all of our clients out there.
Thank you, Zach. How about you, Janie?
Well, I want to pick up just a tiny bit on Zach and then offer another layer. When Zach was talking, I was thinking about how we all fit together up underneath the tribal government or the producer, the individual producer. And although we all, you know, kind of maybe come at things differently or seamlessly work together, that whole system sits up underneath what we need. Each part of that system to sit up underneath food and ag and our producers and tribal governments in this space. So, you know, yes, what Zach just said is truly important. The other thing I think too, though, is, you know, if you look at all of those resources, and there are what, hundreds, sometimes what's missing, and I think this is an area that we can continue to scaffold and build on together and with the folks who are on the call, is what are the possible sequencing that you need to think about. So sometimes we look at things like the portfolio that USDA has, and we only think about conservation. But we forget that conservation programs tie to lending programs, tie to crop insurance programs, and they all tie together. And sometimes you can go down a path and not really think about how it all weaves together. And having worked inside that building, I can tell you that it weaves. And it also, Chris, I'm looking at you, it also weaves over to BIA. And that link has been missing or just weak for many, many, you know, decades. So I just think I'm excited about the resource guide and us all working together, because I think we can continue to create that system that sits up underneath everyone, but also we can actually strengthen those interconnections between the various programs that are outlined in this resource guide and back over to BIA and back, and to other foundations and to other players. Ag is huge. We can't be daunted by that. We actually need to just keep, you know, building up.
Thank you, Janie. Aday, Aaron, others among the panelists want to share your thoughts on this subject?
Ian, if I could, this is Chris. I would like to talk about kind of this continuum, if you will, and I think both Zach and Janie raise that continuum, but I would also, as you go forward with the resource directory, like to see kind of a youth to practitioner to kind of the next step of the passing it on to the next generation. For years, we've been working with different programs to get youth to understand their land and their access to their land and what to do with that land and how to make it productive, but then have that next step go from the youth programs like the youth loan program at the USDA to what's the next step? You know, here are the programs that are going to help you keep building your business essentially. And understand the land that goes along that same pathway. And I think that would help the TA providers, certainly when we talk to youth who are not connected necessarily real tight to USDA programs. They're kind of at a loss for what that next step is. And I think it's a way to make the resource directory even more valuable.
And I would just add to Chris's comment, I think the cobbling together piece is like readily apparent in any project you find in Indian country. And I've heard Janie say this plenty of times, like, yes, NAF is a large fund, but it's really not that large amount of money when we look at the number of tribes, when we look at the number of projects and lands and producers. And then when you layer that with the health of our economic systems in Indian country, it becomes a very heavy load to carry. And that all to say that we are working in a system that is very categorized. You have buckets of money here, buckets of money there. You have technical assistance here and technical assistance there. And it doesn't reflect how Indigenous people view food systems, which is like this connection and community and like resources should flow to these different places. This is like stop damming funding, right? Stop damming technical assistance. And so when you're working in that kind of system, which all of our organizations do, we've all found a place to kind of advocate for our part of that system. But really what I think Chris sort of alluded to and is saying, and what I hear him saying is that really like there's a new generation of advocates for Indigenous food sovereignty that need to bring all those pieces together. So like Janie said, we're kind of below this like layer and we're sort of holding it up and steadying up the stage, but like we're looking at youth and the next generation of practitioners to break that soil and to like start blooming. So like we are kind of holding the space and trying to figure out how to coddle the seeds and warm the seeds of the next generation of ag practitioners to break that soil.
Yeah, I don't think I could say it any better than anybody else. I don't want to follow all of these wonderful people a day. Like that was fantastic. And that was what I was thinking about while Janie was talking to you. Just this document, I think, shows the strength of all of our partnerships and what we all bring to this work as we are supporting those holistic Indigenous ways of looking at food systems, so that people can go to this resource and see that there are people who understand all of those different facets and connections. And not only do we all understand them, but we're all working together as partners as well. And so what I'm really looking forward to from this going forward as this living document continues to be updated with more programs and resources and partners, is just the strength of our partnership together growing. I think it's going to really do wonderful things to help strengthen all of the food systems across Indian country that we work with and work to support every single day. So, but I definitely wouldn't say it any better than anybody else did. This is really exciting. So thanks for attention.
So at this point, thank you for that, Aaron. At this point, I wanted to see if any of our other panelists wanted to respond to that question before I turn it over to Sadie to wrap us up.
Ian, I got one last thing to say, and it's if you can't figure out by looking at 100 and some odd pages of this guide that there's a lot of jobs here to be done. And I know I'm looking at a day, and I know Chris alluded to it, Zach did too. There is so much work to be done in this space, and I think Indian country writ large has yet literally to even scratch the surface of the importance of food and ag to our communities and to our well-being and to our economies, but how deeply we can be in this space and create jobs for the next generation. And that's what makes me excited, is how this can all knit together, because there's a lot there. So
thank you for that, Janie. And I think what we've been hearing from a number of tribes through our work on COVID relief and particularly federal funding to support tribes as they work to provide relief to their own people and figure out how do they recover and how do they transform, how do they make their communities more resilient to these kinds of crises. It's extraordinary how many tribes are now focusing on, like a laser on food sovereignty and food security, and not wanting to be ever again as vulnerable as they find themselves right now. And so, I think, us working together is incredibly important. And obviously this resource directory is just one of the many ways that we are and should be working together. So with that, I wanted to thank you, two of the panelists, and turn it back over to Sadie.
All right, thank you, everyone. I just want to echo Ian's point about the panelists joining us today. We are so blessed to have so many of you all on one call. So I just wanted to talk about one other thing. So as we mentioned previously, NCAI plans to continuously update this resource directory, and this is just the first version. And so if you see a resource that we may have missed, please fill out the Google form that I put in the chat, and we'll be sure to make a note of it in the next version. And lastly, if you want to get more information about NCAI's NCAI's Food Sovereignty Initiative, please email us at foodsovereignty@nci.org with a subscription, and we'll be sure to add you to our listserv. So again, I want to say thank you to everyone. Thanks for joining, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.